All right, hi everyone. Welcome to today's event. It is our February 2022 Portals Community Call. As always, hosted by Nicholas Hayduke. Great to have him back. As always, I hope everyone's doing well today. As we get started, please do know that we do welcome your input, your questions, your comments. Look for the questions block in the webcast interface. You can enter those at any time. I know Nick does keep an eye on it. We're also recording today's event and we'll be sending out details after the event concludes as well. So without any further delay, Nick, I'm going to hand things off to you.
Alrighty. Hello, everyone. Glad you could join us today. We've got a topic that is a little bit more developer focused today. I know I get lots of questions for kind of developer type topics, so that's what we've got today. We're going to explore the feature that just is now generally available, which is code components, or as they kind of used to be known, PCF controls within Portal. So it's actually a topic we've covered once before, but we covered it while I was in preview, so there were some features, and now we're going to talk about a couple other ways that you can use code components in portals. All right, well, why don't we kind of get into this? Quick intro, if this is your first time joining us, welcome. My name is Nicholas Hayduke, the President and Software Engineer with Engineered Code Consulting, Inc., based here in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. A Microsoft MVP with a focus in Power Apps portals, having started my career with ADX Studio 10 plus years ago, 2009. So we're getting close to 13 years now. If you are interested, you can connect with me on LinkedIn or follow us on Twitter, blog, our YouTube channel where we put out our weekly tips. We've also got the podcast, which I'm happy that me and Mr. Nick Dolman did finally get to record a podcast a few weeks back, and I believe it was released this weekend. So if you're a subscriber to Refresh the Cache, you can check that out, the new episode there. But please, if you'd like to go ahead and connect with me on LinkedIn or follow me on any of those other channels. As always, just want to say thank you and shout out to Jason and the team at MS Dynamics World for assisting us with this monthly call. Really happy to have the partnership, and yeah, really appreciate all the stuff they do to get the word out and to help us host it here. So thanks to the MS Dynamics World team. All right, so agenda as always, we've got some news to cover. Then we'll dive deeper into today's topic, which, as I mentioned, is code components in portals. We'll talk about the date and time of the next portal community call, and then there will most likely be some time for some Q&A as well. Okay, portals news. It seems like when I started this whole thing a couple of years ago, the monthly news was far and few between. We'd maybe talk about some community content that had been published. But now it seems like almost every month we've got a couple slides worth of new features that are either generally available or in preview. So I've really seen the pace that Microsoft is improving the portals really increase. So that's great to see. And this month is no different. So this first one here is the topic du jour. So I won't get too much into it because we'll talk about it once we get to our actual topic there. But code components in portals is now generally available. So that's great to see. It includes a few new features that we'll talk about, which is the ability to just drop a code component directly on a page without it being tied to a form. And with it, and somewhat kind of tied together, is that the ability to query data using portals and the web API is now generally available. So there's basically the read capabilities in the web APIs there, and you'll see that even includes running fetch XML queries from your portal. We'll see that in the example that Microsoft provides of their PCF control. As part of that, Microsoft has introduced column permissions as part of Portal. So we've got historically we've had what used to be called entity permissions and are now known as table permissions, but they've introduced the concept of column permissions. So you can now give certain users access to some columns and other users not access to those columns. So It's important to note that I believe at this time, those column permissions are really only meant for the web API. So they're not necessarily enforced on lists and advanced forms and basic forms and that sort of thing, but they are supported in the web API. So which is great, because I mean, if you have to kind of expose the API, you're really kind of putting you're exposing an interface there that in the wrong hands could do some bad things. So it's good that they're giving you even more granular control, so that if you have different users who need different things, you have that control to say. Whereas before, you could control which columns were available via the web API, but it was kind of all or nothing in terms of if you need to give it to one user, you kind of had to give it to all the users who had those permissions. So you couldn't say, hey, some users have access to change the first name of the contact, but other users don't. It was either kind of available via the web API or it was not. There was no kind of fine-grained control there. So continuing to see a lot of investment from Microsoft in the web API. So that's great to see. All right. Moving on here. So the Power Virtual Agent integration with portals is also generally available. So this is essentially a kind of a chatbot widget that you can kind of drag and drop, and I think there's some theming capabilities in there that they kind of build in. So makes it easy to, in the portal, add a Power Virtual Agent chatbot. So that's a cool little thing that you can do within the Portal Studio. So that is available as well. Then the last thing here that I would like to talk about would be the 2022 Release Wave 1 plan. So this is the topic of the podcast that Nick Dolman and I did a few weeks back. So I'm not going to kind of get into too much, because I don't want to rehash that. If you want to kind of dive deeper into the release plan, then feel free to check out the podcast. But just at a very high level, it includes really cool things like the support for the file and image column. We've got multi-select, and now we've got file and image columns coming. There's some audit logging things that they're adding, some admin APIs to create, delete, restart, and list your portals. So if you want to improve your ALM process, and if you're creating organizations or Dynamics or Dataverse environments as part of your ALM process, you can have it script and create the portal as well. They're adding portal checker calls to the CLI, to the Power Platform CLI, as well as the Dataverse search, which is now in preview, I believe, but is going to be generally available. So that was part of the release wave plans as well. All right. So like I said, it hasn't been that many weeks since we last met. This one's a little bit early because I'm hoping to take a little bit of time off here. So in the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've had quite a number of new things available for us to tackle. So really exciting to see all these changes from the product team. Let me just check here. All right, and so that kind of covers the news portion. So let's talk about today's topic, which is code components in portals. So as I mentioned, code components in portals. So code components, also known as PCF controls. PCF controls have been around for a few years now. They were in like kind of beta or preview for a number of years before becoming generally available. And so the code components are now generally available in a portal. So as I mentioned, we covered code components in a previous call, but that was kind of back in the day when code components the PCF controls were really intended to replace a specific component on one of your basic or advanced forms. So let's say you had a field that was, say, a number. On that number field, you didn't want to just be like a text input. You didn't want users to type. You wanted them to do some sort of slider. And that's kind of the prototypical example, and that's what I kind of demonstrated in the last call. So that is one of the things that's now generally available. You can use the code components to replace fields on a form. And the way that works is you just kind of do your normal development. You build your PCF control, You go onto the form in the make.powerapps.com. I think you still have to switch to the classic. You enable your PCF control for that particular form and for that particular control, and the portal will respect that. So that's fantastic. That was kind of what was the preview that I demonstrated last time. What has been added over the last little while and as part of the GA is two main things. One is that those code components now support the portal's web API. So within a PCF control or within a code component, you can essentially take a dependency on the Dataverse web API kind of in general, and then kind of do that so that whether you're doing it via a model-driven app or a portal, you're still getting the access to the Dataverse API in a consistent way. So now on a portal, if you just take a dependency on the web API and you write a PCF control in the same way that you would have written it for a model-driven app, the portal will respect that web API. Now, to be clear, that is still the web API of the portal. So you still have to go and set up your site settings and turn on the web API, enable it for the tables that you want, do your permissions, all that sort of stuff. But it allows you to, assuming your permissions are set up, you can take a PCF control that was previously developed for maybe a use outside of Portal, but did have that dependency on the web API, and leverage that on your portal. So that was one of the things. The other big thing that they've introduced is the fact that rather than replacing a field on the form, you can now just take your PCF control and put it anywhere that you want on your portal using a liquid tag. So there's a liquid tag called code component. At a minimum, you just give it the name of your PCF control, and you can put that on the page. So that's great because you can really just, start building out whatever custom interfaces that you'd like on your portal using PCF controls. As well, if you have any existing, if you go to the community, there's the PCF.gallery. So there's all these different places where you can get these, freely available PCF controls or code components. So that allows you to just take those and drop them wherever you want in the portal. Generally, those ones would have some sort of dependency on the web API, just because if you're putting something on the screen, generally it's you're retrieving information or saving information. That wasn't strictly necessary for when you're replacing a control on a form, because the form itself handled the saving and the retrieval, and you were just kind of responsible for the display of whatever value was in there. But if you're going to do the code component on the page via the liquid tag, then most likely you're going to want to get into the web API development to whether it's for reading or any of the CRUD operations that you would want on your portal. So very cool that capability is there, and it probably means that going forward we're going to really kind of focus, like here internally when we're building out custom UIs like that. Before, that would have been probably just a kind of a regular React app that we would include on a portal. Now, I don't know if there's any reason why we wouldn't do it as a PCF control and allow that. So rather than say uploading web files and with the JavaScript in there, just deploy those as PCF controls. There's a little bit of you may not love how you deploy or PCF controls. You got to push them up with the solution and move that solution between environments. So that may not be everyone's cup of tea, but I think it's a pretty clean way to do it. The only other thing I would note before I just get into showing you kind of an example of a code component in the portal is when it was in preview, you did have to set up some table permissions on the web resource table. If you ever went through that process, I mean, it was pretty straightforward, but it just kind of felt weird that you had to create this like global entity permission on the web resources table. That requirement has been removed, so it's no longer critical, or you no longer have to create that table permission on the web resources table. If you just simply add the PCF control to the form or using the liquid tag, that's all you have to do. You don't have to worry about any additional permissions beyond what is required by the control itself. So no need to have that special web resources table permission. Okay, well, let's get into an example. So on my screen here, what I've done is within the Power Apps sample. So this is a Git repository that Microsoft has. So within Power Apps samples, within the Portals directory, there is a Portals Web API control. So Microsoft has created a sample PCF or code component that you can build and add to your portal, and it shows you, in addition to showing you how to kind of build a PCF control and put it onto your portal, lots of great examples about using the Web API in there as well. So I haven't changed any code in here. So this is literally, if you go to Git, you clone this, you will get this PCF control. We've got the, you got all your packages. All I did was kind of set up my npm directory, all that sort of stuff, so I could build it and deploy it. So we will take a little bit deep diver into the code here in just a second, but I just kind of wanted to go through the process of what do I have to do to deploy this to my portal. Let's assume that I've got it built. I can go in here, run npm run build. That's going to build my package. That's all I had to do. I had to do my, like I said, my npm install just to get all my packages. I run my npm run build. That's going to go off and build the control as it was provided to me from Microsoft. So once that process completes, then we're just going to do a pack PCF push, which will take that PCF control and install it in my Dataverse environment. So if I were to go back here, so I'm just going to do a push of this. I'm just using the PP. If you're not familiar, the PP parameter here is just the publisher prefix. So I'm just using NH as my publisher prefix. If I do that, I run that command, what it's going to do, it's going to connect. This is, again, using the Power Platform CLI. So it's going to use my connection to the Dataverse environment that I pointed it to, and it's now taking my PCF control and it's deploying it to my environment. All right, now what I'm going to do is, so that's just going in, it's deploying my solution. It's created this Power Apps Tools _nh.zip solution, and it's currently going through the process of importing that. We'll give it a second, but it should come as no surprise that I've run through this already. So this thing will already be in there. It's just updating that. So I'm just in my environment here that I'm using for demo purposes, and you can see that we've got this Power Apps Tools _nh environment. So if I were to click on this, within there, we will see the PCF control that I have created. So it's just importing, it's publishing now. So here is the PCF control. The key point here to know is that you need this name. So this nh_sample namespace portal web API control. And if you're kind of curious as to where that comes from, if we just go to our control manifest, we've got our we've got our namespace, we've got our constructor, and it's just prefixing it with our publisher prefix. So it's nh_sample namespace dot portal web API control. So that's where that's coming from. So we've got this PCF control. Again, if this was a PCF control that was replacing a field on a form, then I would just go to the form, I would go to the table, go to the form. Again, I think you still have to switch to classic, change the control for that particular thing, and then you go to the portal and it would work. In this case, this is a control that's meant to just be placed on the page. It's not meant to replace another control on the form. It is meant to just be placed anywhere on a page. So I'm gonna go over here. Now I am in Portal Studio. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back to my home page. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a new page. And this is where I'm going to place my code component. So I'm just going to call this Portals community call code component. Portals community call code component. So I've got those two things. Now I've got my page, and at this point, I don't even think in preview yet do they have it, so you can go in here and just say code component. So it does still require you to edit Liquid. So I'm going to go in here. Oh, make sure I'm in the right place here. So I'm in there, go in here. Okay, so there's my little area here. So I'm just going to add my code component in here. So doing this from memory, so forgive me when I get it wrong, but I believe it's code component. And then you go name, colon, and then the name of the component. So I believe it was nh underscore sample. Of course, I'm going to forget now. It's like sample namespace, I think. Yeah, sample namespace. Of course, it's going to save here. It's not going to like that. Let me finish here. So sample namespace dot portal web API control. Is that what it was? Portal web API control sample namespace. There we go. So you're not going to see it in this preview, but we have added it to the form. So the fact that we haven't gotten an error, that's a good start. So now I'm going to browse the website and see what we get. There we go. So this is the PCF control that we'll kind of dive into a little bit more about what it's doing. But there's our PCF control. So all we had to do was get the PCF control in our environment and use the liquid code to get the name of it and display it on the page. Now, of course, just in preparation for this, I did change a couple of site settings, but really the only site settings that I really changed was I set up the web API. So this control, what it does is allows you to create accounts, delete accounts, and do some calculations with accounts. So all I had to do was I went into here, and in the web API, I just enabled the web API for accounts. And being lazy, I just said, yes, we've enabled all the fields. So I just added these two. In production, you'd want to be much more specific about which fields you want. But that's pretty much it. I just enabled those fields so that this control had access to the web API. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sign in because the web API is going to want me to sign in to do any of these operations. I'm just going to kind of give you a quick tour of what this control does that Microsoft has provided us. Back to there. Let me just go back to, there we go. Refresh this. Yes. So now I'm logged in. Now, if I just do, so if I say refresh record count, you can see that I have one record that has a revenue of 100, 0 records with 200, and 1 record with 300. So if I say create record with annual revenue of 100, click that. That's created that thing. Now I'm going to refresh my record count. I'd expect this number to go to 2, just as we expected. So we can see that this is using the Portals web API to talk to Dataverse and to create those records. For example, if I were to switch this and go over to, I guess over here, and I were to go to, that's interesting. So I'm just trying to get to where I can see accounts. Guess I don't have an app in this environment. This isn't going to give me what I want. I guess I don't have an app in this environment that gives me contacts. All right, let's, I haven't clicked advanced find yet today, so that'll take a second to load, but let's let that load in the background. Because I don't think, unless, do we have under security? No, we don't have, it used to be under security, but we don't have accounts in there anymore. Anyways, we'll let the advanced find load and I'll show you the records that are being created there. So we've now got our PCF control that's interacting with Dataverse through the Portals web API. We've got a question here from Ulrike. How would it react if you didn't sign in? The PCF control itself would just go there, and I think, well, let's find out. I think it's going to just fail. Yeah, if I looked in my dev tools, yeah, it's just going to give me 403 forbiddens on the web API. So I would say that the PCF control itself is not handling the lack of web, like valid, like the authenticated web API very well. So you'd want to kind of build that into your control, because yeah, it's not going to react overly well right now because of the way that the PCF control is built. All right, go back to go back to here. So let's just take a peek under the hood of what this PCF control does, because I mean, really, once you get past this point, you now know how to, once you've installed your PCF control, add into the portal is a cinch. You just use the liquid tag and then just make sure whatever web API permissions you need are on there, and that's it. You don't have to create the table permissions for the web resource table or anything like that anymore. So that's all good. So let's take a quick peek at this PCF control that Microsoft has provided for us. So in this particular case, it does look like there is a string property, display name, string property, display key, description, single line of text, bound true. So let me just see where we got this. So within the string property, display string property. So one of the things I kind of want to mention was, I'm not sure if this is an actual example of it, but if we just go back to this one right here, and go back into here. So what I'd mentioned was that we use the name parameter to pass in the name of the PCF control, but PCF controller code components allow you to have other parameters. So if this PCF control happened to support additional parameters, it's as simple as just putting them in here. So I haven't tried this, but let's give it a let's just see what happens. So the name is string property. I don't know if let's just discard. Let's go in there and edit this again. So you can go into there, say string property hello. I'm not sure if it's displayed anywhere on the portal. We'll see. Browse website, and we'll give that a look. But the idea is that if you wanted to, I don't see hello anywhere, so I don't think that they're actually using that particular parameter anywhere. But the idea is that if your PCF control has parameters, where in the classic kind of form designer, you get prompted for those parameters, you can put it in. So whether it's API keys or whatever else that you need to pass in, you can do that as part of the liquid tag syntax. So when you go to edit those, it's just as simple as putting those parameters in. It's just as simple as putting those parameters in here and put them in there. So if, for example, there's some API keys that you need, the good news is that you can just pass those in right here. You can grab them from a site setting, for example, and put them in that way, and you can do that. So any parameters that you need to pass into your PCF control is supported by just additional parameters being passed into the liquid here. All right. So going back here, so the control manifest, that's just a basic PCF control. I'm not going to give a whole talk on how to build a PCF control. I'm not the best person to do that. I've written a few in my lifetime, but certainly not something I'm doing every day. But what I do find interesting in this particular case is what they're doing in the index TypeScript file. So fairly lengthy TypeScript file you can see here. But what I really found kind of cool to see were examples of using the web API. So what we can do, when I mentioned that in our manifest, we declare this dependency right here, and we say, hey, this thing uses the web API. That means in our index TypeScript file, we will get a reference to the web API. So let me just see if I can find a reference to it here. This is all the rendering. They're a little bit further down here. So right here, so this context web API. So if we didn't declare that dependency, this wouldn't work. And like I said before, when it was first in preview, even if you declared that dependency, the portal wouldn't have handled properly setting up the web API within the context. So this line would have failed. Now that they have that support for passing in that dependency, you can do this and do request the records. So for example, this function right here, you can see populate items to delete. So that's going to populate this list right here. So how do we get that list? Right here. So this is, we're creating a query string. So we're selecting what is the attribute name. Now, Microsoft does provide some documentation for this specific PCF control that they've built, that the name fields here, the required attribute names, are something you can set to. You can pass them in through some static JavaScript if you ever want to have this example work on something other than the count. So that's why these are all kind of parameterized, because you can define these different parameters. So that's not necessarily a count entity, but we just left it as the default. So we're saying select that, and what we're doing is we're looking for that it contains the name contains the name, I guess, is what this is doing. Name required, oh, sorry, required attribute value, sorry. So there's a second thing that contains the attribute value. So that's your, basically, that's your OData query that is going to get used for the web API. Once you do that, you pass in the entity name here, which would be account. You're passing in your query string, and you are firing off your web API request. And then once that's done, then we're just going through and it's adding these drop-down elements to the list. So that's a pretty simple read operation that's going through the portal's web API to get all the accounts that match a specific thing, whereas the name contains whatever's in this required attribute value. As you can imagine, most of the things are pretty simple after that. So we got delete. Well, what are we doing on delete? We're calling the context web API delete record. We're passing the name, we're passing the value, and it's going to do the delete. This is where things get even more fun. So this calculate average button on click handler. So let's just jump back to here. So calculate average value. So if we say I want to refresh record count, we can see that we have 2 at 100 and 1 at 300. So that's going to give me some ugly average that I'm going to calculate here. So you can see that the average is 166, because that's the average of 2 100s and 1 300. So how do we calculate that? That's being done by a fetch XML query. So it's doing the fetch XML query distinct. We're doing an aggregate. You're doing an average on the using an alias of average and square value. You're doing an aggregate of the currency attribute name. So in this case, it's the accounts. I'm not sure which field we're passing in, but some field on the account where that field is not null. So we're doing that average. So we create that fetch XML. Then all we do is we pass that in. Because we've got the retrieve multiple functionality now built in to the portal's API, web API, we can then simply just run this fetch XML query. Again, you're going to have to make sure that you've got your entity, your table permission set up properly. But assuming you do, you're now able to run fetch XML queries through the web API. We can always do fetch XML through Liquid, and so often what we do is we create these kind of little microservices into templates that returned JSON. Now you don't have to go through that anymore. You can just directly use the web API to make your fetch XML calls. And you can do a lot of cool different things with fetch XML. So it's really cool here that they do support doing things like aggregates and averages and all that sort of stuff. We do that. We get the response. The way that the aggregate queries work is that you get a single result back with whatever you alias. So that's why we're getting the first entity who's with the average val, and that's giving you your average value back. So web API, fetch XML, and this all is, the important thing here is that this isn't necessarily specific to a portal. You could take this PCF control and use it wherever else you use PCF controls, because we're not doing anything here that's specific to portals. That's the really kind of cool part. So you can imagine that is it likely that you're going to take things that were on a portal and move them somewhere else? Well, no, because that kind of history of all those controls may not exist. But are there controls out there that already exist that you want to bring into a portal? Absolutely. And these features let you do that because, if you're looking at PCF controls that were built for Dataverse, I would say the majority or a lot of them would have this dependency on the web API. Now that we've got that availability to us, we no longer necessarily have to modify and make these things portal specific. Now, will you still want to make your PCF controls portal specific? Maybe, and that's mostly because of the look and feel. If you're building, if we're building a PCF control for a model-driven app, we're using the Fluent UI because that makes it feel like it's a part of a model-driven app. Whereas in a portal, your UI framework is Bootstrap version 3. So can you just copy and paste these controls? Yes. Or use them in multiple places? Yes. From a UI perspective, is that always going to give you the optimal user experience? Maybe not. But could you have two different PCF controls that use the same underlying TypeScript, and then you build a UI layer on top of them that gives you your two different things? Absolutely. Could that be a parameter that you pass into these? What UI framework do I want to use? Absolutely. So you can have these PCF controls that say, hey, I want you to display in a model-driven app, so then it uses Fluent UI, or I want you to display on the portal, and then it uses Bootstrap. All of that is now possible, and you can have a single PCF control that handles those things. So yeah, then you've got your calculate average. We've got a refresh, which is just doing a retrieve multiple again, just using the select and the filter. And so Microsoft has some good documentation if you're interested in knowing what are all the operations that are supported, because one thing to keep in mind is that the portal's web API may not support and does not support every single thing that the kind of the main Dataverse web API supports. So, and like I said, Microsoft does have this documented about here are the filter things that it supports. Supports contains. Maybe there's other ones that it doesn't support that the main Dataverse one does. So something to keep in mind as well is that there are certain restrictions about what you can do on a portal versus the main one. So could run into some compatibility issues there if you're trying to develop a single PCF control that works on them. So this is the one that's doing the count of the records. Again, just another retrieve multiple, generating some markup here. And then we've just got some kind of some helper functions here to create some stuff. So those are the primary. I think that there's in here. So we've got our create button handler again. It's creating the data, and it's just again using the web API create record call. So no real kind of rocket science here. You got your web API connection. If you've already built PCF controls, this is going to be very, very familiar to you. The only other thing I did want to mention was when building PCF controls in a model-driven app, there's an opportunity for, rather than targeting a specific control in a model-driven app, you can target what they call a data set. And that is meant to replace either subgrids or views. So I know the first PCF control I built was something that used Google Maps to integrate. And so when we were looking at a list of properties. And so one of the options when you drop down in the views, one of those when you clicked it would actually show you a Google Maps view of all of the different properties. And the way we did that is we said, hey, this is replacing a view. So we use the data set type of PCF control, and so that replaced the list, the view of the list view of that view. That is not supported on the portals currently. So if you're trying to target a data set and you're hoping for something on your form to replace a subgrid, that's not going to work. If you're looking for that to replace on just kind of a main list, what used to be called an entity list, again, that's not going to work. So the data set support for PCF controls or code components doesn't exist in the portal. So in those cases, if you do want something, that's when you're going to be wanting to use the code component liquid tag, because if you have a list and you want to kind of do your own flavor of it, you can do that by just implementing the code component and dropping it on the page using some liquid. All right. And that's kind of what I want to cover. Again, not necessarily about how to build a PCF control, because that's a whole thing unto itself, and I'm hopefully I think there's lots of other community content on how to do that. But what I want to share was really how it's not really that much different anymore. When it first came out, there were some kind of uniquenesses about doing it for portals. Now the big difference between a portal one and one for a model-driven app is, okay, what UI framework are you targeting? So, targeting Bootstrap, that's going to give you the best kind of look and feel. But beyond that, you build your PCF control, use the liquid tag to drop it on the page based on the name, or use it to replace a control on a form, and off you go. And then you're just back into the regular world of creating PCF controls. You have access to your web API. Again, keep in mind that maybe there are some certain functions that won't work on the portal's web API, but pretty broad support for the web API functions there as well. So I'm going to just quickly jump back to my slides here. Just quickly, the next call here, we've got March 25th. So that's next month, March 25th. We'll be back into the daylight savings time. So that's 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, 12 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. I know we've got some time here, so definitely open to if there's any questions that you might have, so go ahead and start getting those in the Q&A section. In the meantime, I will again express my gratitude towards MS Dynamics World, Jason and the entire staff over there about at the MS Dynamics World for their assistance with these things. And I'm open to some questions here. While we kind of wait to see if there are any questions, so one of the questions I get asked about a lot with this would be things like, could we use this to build like editable grids? So, I mean, and the answer is absolutely. Now, an editable grid, that's a relatively sophisticated UI element. There's lots of things to handle, but there's absolutely no reason, given these capabilities, that you couldn't build an editable grid, right? You can get the records, you can page through the records, you can handle the click events, especially if you're building in React, using whatever kind of framework that you'd like. You can build that UI to do an editable grid. So you've got all the capabilities. It's definitely possible. I know that Microsoft did provide, when they first introduced the web API, they provided a kind of a basic editable grid option. But I would strongly recommend now, if you were to undertake that, just do it as a PCF control and see what you can do. The other thing that I would recommend you doing if you're starting to get into these PCF controls is check out the PCF.gallery, and maybe I'll bring that up here. Where did that go? There we go. PCF.gallery. So there's a ton of things in here. What do we have? 24 pages? Yeah, so there's a lot in here. A lot of these will end up being open source as well. So the GitHub projects will be publicly available. So maybe what you exactly need isn't here, or maybe what you exactly need doesn't meet or doesn't fit exactly into what we just talked about for a portal. But there's a decent chance that what you need might be close in here. And if that happens to be an open source project, you can use that as a great starting point. So I know we were looking at, say, portal view shortcuts. Yeah, this is for model-driven apps. But let me just close this. So let me just see if they've got. So we've got portals here. Let's see what they've got. I know that most in the past they were all about things that you'd put in a model-driven app related to portals, and that looks kind of what we got. Yeah, I would expect now that, so we got UK postcode validator, we got address lookup, Power Apps portals, that's the web form step visualizer. But I would think some of these basic controls like, prefix or, postal code validator, some of these might just work fairly well in a portal. So it would just be a case of downloading, getting these solutions in your environment, and then whether it's on a form or whether you're using a code component, off you go. So now that this is generally available, we've got lots in here. Strongly recommend, this is kind of the go-to place for looking for community PCF controls. Now that this is generally available on the portal, I strongly recommend you check this out, and there's lots you can do. All right, got some questions here. So I'll be making a quantity based on org size slider for a request to quote form if I can. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, quantity based on org size. Yep, there you go. Yeah, and this, because a slider, that's the kind of, again, the prototypical example is a slider. So that's a great use case. We've got another question here. So I have a question about web roles. There are some blogs where I see where a new web role is created, checkbox authenticate is checked. On one of your sessions, you mentioned that authenticated rule is just a container for other permissions. It's important not to change any of the settings by checking the boxes on any custom web roles. Please clarify if we have to check the checkbox when we create a new web role or not, or if I misunderstood. Okay, never, ever, ever check the authenticated checkbox. The one and only web role that should have that checked is the authenticated user's web role that comes out of the box. When you create your own custom web role, do not check that checkbox. The underlying platform code, and it's funny, we're working on a project right now where we're kind of getting into some of the XRM Portals Community Edition code. So we're actually dealing with the code that gets the authenticated web roles user role. The way the code works underneath the scenes is it says, there's a function essentially that says, get me all of the web roles for the currently logged in user. And the way it does that is it says, we've got the contact record, find me all the web roles that are linked in the end-to-end relationship over to web roles. And let's say there's two in there. We've got web role A and web role B. So the first part of that function goes out and it gets web role A and web role B. Then the next bit of code says, they also get me the authenticated web roles, authenticated user's web role. So it does not matter if a user or if a contact is attached to the authenticated user's web role. They will always be treated as if they have that authenticated web role. Now, what you're going to do is if you have two web roles with that thing checked, I don't know what's going to happen. It's probably going to be bad. The code assumes that there's one in there. So will you start seeing that the new one that you checked get it? Maybe. It just depends on how that query is written. I don't remember off the top of my head whether it will pick the new one or the old one, but it will be bad because it's not going to do what you expect. So the idea is that using the authenticated user's web role, use that for your base set of permissions that anyone who logs onto the portal will get. If you only have one level of permission for your contact, that means you're done. You don't ever have to associate a contact with a web role because they just will all get what's in the authenticated user's web role. But again, the system assumes that there's only one of those in the database. So any new ones that you create, do not check that box, but that means you have to associate it with the actual contact that has that for them to get those. So it should only, and it's the same with the anonymous. There's also an anonymous checkbox, same thing. You never want to check that. That should only be for the web role, the one single web role that comes out of the box. So just always leave that blank. All right, sounds like that answered the question. Yeah, is there anything else that anyone's got for me this week, whether it's PCF control or anything else related to portals? Is that per website? Yes, web roles are per website. Yep. So if you have multiple websites, you'll see multiple like authenticated users web role. You'll see multiple anonymous web roles. Yes. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions here. So Jason, I guess if you want to wrap things up here and we'll let people get back to their real jobs. Oh, sorry, we got one question here. Does the PCF capability have any impact on how we need to write calls to the Portals web API in our JavaScript that we put on Portals web pages? No, it doesn't. Like if you've got existing code, like that's not going to change anything. It may make you want to revisit how you're doing that and whether you should be doing it as a PCF control or not. And that's going to be really come down to personal preference. Like if we were to start a new project today where I just want to put a bunch of JavaScript on a page and build a custom UI, do I do that in just a regular JavaScript file? or in a React app and just like drop it on the page, because that's like we've got current projects right now. We do that a ton. We just build a React app, we upload the JavaScript as a web file to Portal, and we put that React app on the page. So then the question is, going forward, would we instead just build a PCF control? I don't know if the answer is yes or no to that. We haven't, like, this is all brand new, so I kind of feel like the answer might be yes, but I would be lying if I said that's what we're doing currently. But it could be that going forward, the way that we build these custom API or custom interfaces is with that, because what it does, the nice thing about it is it means that you can transport that code as a solution. If you upload it as, say, a web file, then you're transporting that code as data. So data is a little bit usually more of a pain to manage, so it just kind of fits in with other PCF controls. But to me, the big win here is just that it opens up the world of other existing PCF controls. If you're writing your own thing from scratch, it really will come down to personal preference whether you want to do that as a PCF controller, as a code component, or as just a regular JavaScript on your portal. I would think for kind of a smaller thing, like if it was just a small little operation, I probably wouldn't go through the whole effort of a PCF control. But something a little bit more sophisticated, that's where the question is probably more appropriate.
Perhaps an interesting question to end things on here. Thanks for that. Thanks to everyone else for all the questions. Yeah, I think we can begin to wrap up, Nick. Thanks as always for doing this, for taking the time, for preparing everything. Really appreciate it, and look forward to seeing you again next month.
All right, thank you everyone for attending today.
Yep. And with that, we will end today's session. Have a good day.